Okay, so welcome everyone. We're going to review the time period 1200 to 1450. By the way, each of these time periods, you have 4 of them, are equally weighted on the AP tests. 25% of the test is pulled from each of these time periods. So a quarter of the test will come from this period right here. Now, the first region I want to look at is Asia, East Asia, and this is because topic 1.1 is all about China. And there are 3 things you need to know about China in this time period. And these 3 things are this. First of all, there are continuities in Chinese state building. And what that simply means is that China, from 1200, we're kind of jumping in towards the end of the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty is using the same system of a bureaucratic rule that China had used for 1200 years, over 1200 years. And that is using Confucianism as a gate to get a job in the bureaucracy. Remember, a bureaucracy is kind of this chain of command from the emperor all the way down with these connected nodes, so to speak, and it allows for centralized rule. Appointed bureaucrats that connect the emperor to every region and every province of the empire. That's what you have when you have a centralized rule. To get a job in that bureaucracy, you have to pass a civil service examination system on Confucianism. And that brings in all the thought and content of Confucian ideas about what proper behavior is and kind of fuses it to this bureaucracy. I made a video about that back in Unit 0. So that's one of the things you have to know. The other thing you need to know here is that during this time period there was a huge economic boom in China going on in terms of luxury items, trade in luxury items, and also massive urbanization. China's capital, Shanghai, had over 2 million people in it, and there were a handful of cities in China in this time period that had a million or more people. A lot of this is because, and this is right from topic 1.1, the Song rebuilt the Grand Canal that connects its capital in the north with the rich agricultural region in the southern river area. So that allowed for enormous surpluses of food. So the Grand Canal. Also, the government monopolized and controlled the creation of luxury trade items, silk and porcelain mainly, and regulated them. And these items of trade became huge income earners for China. And lastly, the Song dynasty created a paper currency. It was called flying money, and this paper currency sped up transactions and also made them much safer and more efficient and convenient. So those are 2 things. All right, and the third thing about China is that its civilization radiated its influence out to almost all of East Asia around it, and that would be to Korea, to Southeast Asia, what is today Vietnam and that area, and also to Japan. And you need to know some examples about how Chinese civilization radiated out. The Chinese form of Buddhism would go into these areas, so Buddhism. You would have filial piety, which is this deep respect for elders. And you're going to find that, deep respect for elders. And even the elders, once they've died, their graves and their spirits are protected. And also, the last thing is Neo-Confucianism. Now, Confucianism is this idea about human relations. It's not really a religion, but Neo-Confucianism developed in the Song dynasty, right here. And Neo-Confucianism is the idea, it takes in concepts of Taoism and Buddhism and kind of makes Confucianism into a religion, because now the proper relationships in a family with father, the patriarch, the wife, the kids, and that all being part of the larger structure of the empire, has to do now with the cosmic balance of yin and yang. So that's what Neo-Confucianism is, and it's going to spread out as well. So China radiates its civilization around. Now, there are many changes to China politically in this time period. The Song dynasty only goes up to about the year 1279. So it stops pretty early in this time period. The reason for that is, and this will be another item we'll look at on the timeline, it's because of the growth of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols destroy the Chinese capital, and then the Mongols rule it directly for a big chunk of time, roughly 1300 to 1350. the Mongols rule. So we'll say 1350. And this dynasty is called the Yuan dynasty. So it's Y-U-A-N. This is ruled by the Mongols right here. Kublai Khan is the grandson of Genghis Khan. This is what China is when Marco Polo, the famous Italian traveler, visits China. The Yuan dynasty are ruling in that time period. So you have the rule of the Mongols, and then right around the last century in this time period, a peasant revolt overthrows the Mongols. And this peasant revolt, they succeed in doing this because they use gunpowder, one of the first instances of the use of gunpowder for military purposes in the world. And this group of peasants take over China. They destroy the Mongol rule over China, and they name themselves not after their family, because they don't really have a great family name. They're from the lowest part of society. They name themselves the Brilliant Dynasty, and the Chinese word for brilliant is Ming, M-I-N-G. Now you have the rule of the Ming. The Ming are the ones that build the wall you see today. All right, that massive Great Wall, because they don't want Mongols and other barbarians, other nomads coming back into China. Now there was a dirt wall before, but they built that massive stone wall. The Ming send out one of the most famous Chinese explorers, Zhang He. I'll write his name up here. He's been called the Chinese Columbus. He doesn't really come to the Americas, but he goes into the Indian Ocean, and in the Indian Ocean, along the Swahili city-states in Calcutta and Malacca, he reestablishes Chinese tributary relations with these places and tries to get trade going back again. So that's a big deal for China. It's like he's kind of announcing, hey, China's back. And the Ming try to flush themselves of all these what they view as barbaric Mongol practices and culture and purify themselves, and that will really lead to them calling these explorers back and kind of isolating themselves. This is where China is. Now, when 1450 ends, when this time period ends, the Ming are still ruling. As you know, in the next time period, a second invasion of foreigners will come in, the Manchus, and they will destroy the Ming and set up the Qing dynasty, and the Qing will rule all the way into the 20th century. That's the last dynasty in China's history. So this is China in this time period. So let's get rid of them. And now let's look at the Mongols are kind of easy, so let's look at the Mongols. And the Mongols have a very brief but incredibly influential rule. It's about basically the 1200s. So we'll go 1200 to 1300. Genghis Khan starts conquering here. And the significant thing about the Mongols, this is actually in topic or unit 2, which is about exchanges. The Mongols create this incredibly, well, they reconstitute the Silk Road trade that had fallen a long time ago when the Romans and the Han Chinese fell way before this time period. The Mongols bring it back because they have a system of law called the Great Yasa. This is in a podcast. The Great Yasa supports trade. It created passports and safe guarantees of safety to merchants, and the Mongols are all about trade. So they reconstitute this trade on the Silk Roads. And then Genghis Khan dies, and the Mongol Empire breaks up into smaller empires from his grandsons. One of them is the Yuan dynasty, which I showed you in the last timeline when we talked about China. One is the Golden Horde that rules Russia. And in the next time period, we'll see the rise of the Russian Empire, the Russians breaking free from the Mongols. And then there's one in the Middle East. So the Mongols kind of get diffused. Where you see the Mongols in Unit 2 is called Environmental Consequences of Connectivity. I think that might be 2.6. And you need to know about the spread of deadly pathogens. That's what really you need to know in that topic. And the Mongols spread, along with gunpowder and paper-making technology, they also spread the bubonic death, which will reach Europe and wipe out half its population. So that's the deal with the Mongols. Now, we're going to move to the Islamic states. So when we begin 1200, kind of like the Chinese, you have the Abbasid Caliphate ruling. So the Abbasids are ruling. They are Arab-speaking, Muslim-run caliphate. Okay? So the Abbasids rule. During their time, there's an incredible development of education, of learning. If the Chinese in this early time period are the economic urban center of the world, Muslim civilization is the academic and educational center of the world. They have something in their capital, Baghdad, called the House of Wisdom. And it's like a big library where all these scholars are allowed to come in and exchange ideas. They're copying scrolls from the ancient Greeks like Aristotle, and they're advancing medicine and science and mathematics and geometry and really saving those things from being lost to time. So that's the Abbasids. But then, here come the Mongols. The Mongols destroyed Baghdad, I think the year is 1258. In the 1200s, the Mongols come in and they destroy Baghdad. And just like the Mongols, Islamic civilization breaks up. And this is right on the topic page. It breaks up into smaller caliphates. Instead of one unified Dar al-Islam, or Islamic civilization, you have multiple vectors of power, multiple sultanates and caliphates. And what distinguishes these from this one is these are Turkic-speaking peoples, not Arab-speaking peoples. Islam brought unity to Turkish people by wiping clean their polytheisms and giving them a single God, and devotion to that God became more important than their bloodline or of their tribe, which made them always fight with each other. Islam allowed them to form empires. By the way, this is the origins of the Ottoman Empire. They're one of these Turkish-speaking peoples or groups, and the Ottomans get really important in the next time period when we deal with them as a gunpowder empire. Another one of these is the Seljuks. The Seljuks, S-E-L-J-U-K-S, the Seljuks are another Turkish empire, and they're significant because from the European point of view, they go in and they take Jerusalem, and the Pope in Europe launches the crusades to drive them out. And that begins several centuries of conflict called the Crusades between Europe and Islam. So Islam, with these multiple caliphates, becomes another massive umbrella of exchange of science, medicine, all of them drawing from the classical age. That means ancient Greece, like Athens, and the writers like Hippocrates in medicine, and Aristotle, and Archimedes, and all these ancient Greek writers. They're being translated into Arabic, which is still the language they're learning, and it's being spread all over the Dar al-Islam. So Islam is that. There's one last thing about Islam before we go to the next topic, and there are a group of mystics in Islam that have a lot to do with the spread of the religion. Listen, every religion, when it gets too cerebral, when it gets too technical, and you gotta be really, really smart to understand it because it gets so complex and scholarly, seems to have a reaction against it, and that reaction is more of a mystical, feeling, emotional form of the religion. You have this in Christianity in the Middle Ages when it gets too scholarly, and you have mystics that push against it. You have the same thing in Islam. Because in Baghdad, Islam is getting very, very academic, and then a group of people come along and say, it's not about that at all. It's about your very personal and individual encounter with Allah. And these people were called the Sufis. And their form of Islam is called Sufism. They didn't care about doctrinal purity. They didn't care if your belief is a little bit different. They cared about that powerful experience that you had with God or Allah. And because it was so generic when it came to content, Sufism could link with other religions as it spread. It could link with Buddhism and Hinduism and any other religion that had a mystical side that was emphasizing these same things. So the important thing about Sufis or Sufism is that it had a lot to do with the spread of Islam in this time period. Okay, so that was in that video I made back in 1200 to 1450. So this is Islam in this time period. The great network of exchange. And you should know about Mansa Musa, by the way. Islam makes its way across the trade routes, the trans-Saharan trade routes, because they bring camels in. Islam does the same thing in sub-Saharan Africa that it did with the Turkic people here. It provides them a way to get rid of their tribal loyalties and sweep away all their polytheisms, and that model of a caliph that entails political, religious, and military authority all in a single figurehead allows for the rise of the first empires ever in sub-Saharan Africa. And Mali is the one that you should know. Mali, across Africa, is going to trade salt, gold, slaves, and books. Cities grow like Timbuktu. It's a real city. Timbuktu emerged in the northern part of Mali, right on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, and became a vantage point for all the caravans that came down and converged on Timbuktu. So it becomes a huge trading city. And remember from the video, Mansa Musa does his Hajj. He does his pilgrimage to Mecca and shows off his wealth, whether he meant to or not. And it made all these merchants want to do business with Mali. And it brought Mali into this incredible network of exchange that is the Dar al-Islam. That was already going on. So that's important to understand the effect that Islam will have on Africa. It has heavy political and economic effects. Not much of a social effect. Women are still free to do business. They're not, in the Arab-speaking world, they weren't. So there are limitations to the effect of Islam on Africa. So there is Islam and Africa, and those are two different topics. And also trans-Saharan trade, which 3 topics kind of wrapped up into one. Now let's go to, okay, so we've covered China, we've covered the Mongols, we have covered Islam. Now we're going to go over to Europe, and this is pretty easy. In Europe, in 1200, there's feudalism. Take China, Song Dynasty, this ultra-centralized civilization that uses the bureaucracy to manage the entire breadth of the empire. What's going on in Europe is the opposite of that. There's no one centralized political entity. Small little cells of civilization, which are manor houses with peasants who do the farming, emerge across Europe, trying to find some security in this post-Roman world. And what they do is peasants pledge their loyalty to a local landlord. That landlord becomes their lord. He fortifies his house into a castle. They have protection. They can run into the castle, but most of the time they're out working in the fields, benefiting the lord. So each of them benefit from this. The lord gets labor that allows him to turn his land into money. Serfs get protection, something they did not have. And these mutual bonds between them is called feudalism. There are also knights, and by the way, sometimes more than one manor begin to link together, and these eventually coalesce into large kingdoms, such as England and kingdoms across France and Castile and Aragon and Iberia, which will become Spain later. So, but anyway, it's very, very decentralized. So that's what you have in Western Europe. Now, there is one way in which Europe is centralized, and that is culturally. So look at some of the comparisons here. China is very centralized politically and kind of culturally, Buddhism and Confucianism. Western Europe is decentralized politically and socially, but it is centralized in terms of religion, and that is the Roman Catholic Church. There's kind of a shared experience across Western Europe of rituals called sacraments like baptism and Eucharist and all the other sacraments of the Catholic Church that people across Western Europe all have in common. So Catholicism brings a semblance of a unified culture to Western Europe, but most people's allegiances are all local. What shakes all that up are the Crusades, which had been going on a little bit before this. but they're still continuing here because they were never successful. There are several waves of crusaders across several centuries, and they're going to Jerusalem to try to eject the Muslims from the holiest city in Christianity. And although they're all failures, Europeans learn the wealth that Middle Easterners have. They see the incredible rich benefits of the Dar al-Islam. They see silk from China. They bring back coffee, tea, sugar, cotton clothing, silk. They bring back a game from the Muslim world, and they rename the pieces according to their feudal culture. And here you have knights and rooks and pawns. This is how the game of chess emerged. It came from Islam into Europe during the Crusades. So there are all these exchanges here, and that is going to awaken in Europe this desire for trade. When I used to teach U.S. history, this is where I started the beginning of U.S. history, because Columbus was sailing to try to get those things without having to buy them from Muslims. That's what the whole deal was there. The explorers were trying to get around Islam so they didn't have to buy them through them because they jacked the price up. They wanted to get to the actual source of those things. That awakening of these items occurs during the Crusades. Now, everything falls apart. 1350, things get really bad. What happens in 1350? Remember, connecting this to the Mongols, the Black Death makes its way through Italy, and it destroys half of European civilizations. So you have this incredible de-urbanization. If you're dying by being around people, no one wants to congregate together. So cities empty, and it just rolls the wheels of progress backwards and wipes out half the population. And so these are those biological consequences of connectivity, or environmental consequences, whatever. I think that's 2.6. So Europe falls under with the Black Death. Now there is this gradual awakening, recovery of Europe, kind of going up here, as towns recover from the Black Death. Cities, this is an urban thing, cities like Venice, Florence, and later some German and finally English cities recover from the Black Death, and they want to go back to borrowing these things that they saw from the rest of the world, and they want to revive European civilization, but not the feudal system they had. When they were exchanging with Muslims, Europeans learned about their own past from Muslims who had preserved the writings of Plato and Aristotle and the Greeks and everything else. Europeans want that. They want the spirit that they saw in the vibrancy of their own classical age, which was lost during this time, which is called the Dark Ages over here. And this economic recovery has a name. In the 19th century, historians called it the Renaissance. So that's what you have here, the awakening of Europe to its own past. And they're going to engineer their recovery to bring back some of the values of the classical age rather than the values of that dark and dreary kind of feudal time. So that is Europe. So I think we've been through the main civilizations. The other topics here, and I've woven all these things together. Unit 1 has Islam, it has China, it has Europe, it has all these areas. And by the way, one of them, of course, South and Southeast Asia, that we linked with Indian Ocean trade. So you have Swahili city-states along Africa. You have kingdoms that were created in Southeast Asia, like Srijavara, through Buddhists and Hindus. And then you have the things that led to Indian Ocean trade, like technologies, the lateen sail, which allowed you to sail into the wind if you tacked back and forth, the stern rudder, new boats called dhows, and later the huge Chinese boats called junks. All those technological things, the understanding of the patterns of winds in the ocean allow for this vibrant Indian Ocean trade that's going to spread Islam all around the rim of the Indian Ocean. So you have Indian Ocean trade, you have Silk Road trade, Mongols bring it back, and then you have trans-Saharan trade. Really, those are primarily Muslim merchants going to sub-Saharan Africa seeking the gold of Mali, bringing the salt and other things that the people of Mali want. So there's a summary of 1200 to 1450. I'm going to do this next week again with 1450 to 1750. If there's anything here you lack, remember, That content inventory should be very useful for you. You take the things that you don't know, or things you can't explain, and you go to the topic page, or you look at AP Daily Video, AMSCO, or one of Steve Heimler's videos, and that will remediate that. And you should be good to go for the AP test if you follow these and do those things. Okay, thank you very much, and I will see you next week with another live review.